So it's October 1940 in Key West, Florida. A woman named Florinda shows up at a man's house. She's heard rumors. People in town have been talking for a while about the weird old German doctor who used to work at the hospital, about what he might have inside his home. She knocks on the door. The man lets her in, and there, in the middle of the room, is her sister. Her sister Elena, sitting in a chair, dressed in a white wedding gown, a wig on her head, glass eyes where her real ones used to be, her skin waxy and pale, hands folded in her lap. Elena had been dead for 9 years. This man had dug her up from her grave, rebuilt her body piece by piece, and lived with her as his wife for 7 years. And here's the part that still gets me. He was never put in prison. The town largely felt sorry for him, and when he died 12 years later, he was found in his home near a plaster statue he'd made of her. He called it love to his dying day. This is the story of Carl Tanzler. Let me tell you who this man was first, because he's not what you'd expect. Carl Tanzler was born in 1877 in Dresden, Germany. Middle-class family, educated, reasonably well off. He trained in science and worked in radiology, basically the technology for taking X-rays, which in the early 1900s was cutting-edge medical stuff. So he wasn't some unhinged drifter. He was a trained, technically skilled man who held down serious jobs. But Carl also had a thing he believed about himself, a story he told from childhood. He claimed that when he was a young boy, he started having visions of a dead ancestor, a countess from centuries back, who would appear to him and show him things. And in these visions, this ancestor would point toward a face, a woman's face, dark hair, dark eyes, olive skin. And she'd tell him, "That is your true love. That is who you will find." Now, I want to be clear. He believed this completely. This wasn't a bit. This wasn't him being theatrical. He wrote about it years later in detail. He genuinely thought he had been shown, as a child, the face of his future wife. He carried that image in his head for decades. He married a German woman in the early 1900s, had 2 daughters, emigrated to Australia at some point, and eventually ended up in Key West, Florida in 1927. He got a job as a radiologist and laboratory technician at the United States Marine Hospital there, and he got busy. He was known as hard-working, knowledgeable, a little odd. He called himself Count Karl von Kossel, which was a title he had absolutely no legitimate claim to. But he was respected in the hospital. He kept waiting. He kept looking at faces. And then, in April 1930, a young woman walked into his ward. Her name was Elena Milagro de Hoyos. She was 22 years old, Cuban-American, from one of Key West's oldest families. Dark hair, dark eyes, olive skin. She looked exactly like the face in his visions. Elena had come to the hospital because she wasn't well. She'd been getting tired, losing weight, coughing. They ran tests. The diagnosis was tuberculosis. In 1930, tuberculosis was a death sentence for a lot of people. There was no cure yet. It would take another decade before proper antibiotics existed. The treatment options were mostly rest, fresh air, and hoping. Carl Tanzler became Elena's radiologist, and from the moment he saw her, he was gone. He started giving her more attention than any other patient. He'd spend extra time with her. He brought her gifts, jewelry, perfumes, flowers, dresses. He told her she was beautiful. He told her he could save her. He paid for treatments out of his own pocket. He told her mother and sisters that he was going to cure Elena, that he had special knowledge, that modern medicine combined with his methods would work where nothing else could. Elena was kind to him. She was polite. She appreciated the gifts, but she wasn't in love with him. There's no evidence she ever was. She was a sick young woman who was trying to survive. And here was this older man. He was in his early 50s by this point. She was 22, lavishing attention and resources on her. She didn't push him away, but she didn't invite him in either. She was just trying to get better. The treatments didn't work. She kept getting worse. She died on October 25th, 1931. She was 22 years old. Carl Tanzler was absolutely destroyed. Now here's where most people, even people who were truly devastated, would grieve and eventually move on. Carl Tanzler did not move on. He paid for Elena's funeral himself. He paid for her mausoleum, a proper above-ground vault in the Key West cemetery, and he had it built to his specifications. He visited it constantly. He brought flowers. He lit candles. He sat outside it for hours. The family let him do this. They were actually grateful, in a way. He'd paid for the burial. He clearly cared about her. Or at least, they thought he was grieving her like a devoted doctor who'd lost a patient. They didn't find it alarming at first. Key West was a small, warm community. People were kind. But Carl started telling people he could hear Eleanor, that at night, when he sat by the tomb, he could hear her voice coming through the walls, asking him to come to her. People around him weren't sure what to make of that. Some thought he was just a grieving man, talking metaphorically. Others thought he was going a little strange from the loss. He started visiting the tomb at night, alone, sitting outside in the dark. He told people she was calling to him, that she was waiting. And then, 18 months after she died, in April 1933, in the middle of the night, Carl Tanzler climbed into Elena Milagro de Hoyos' tomb and took her body. He put her in a toy wagon, covered her in a sheet, and wheeled her across Key West in the dark to his home. Nobody saw him. Nobody stopped him. He just walked through the streets of this town with a dead woman in a wagon and made it home. This is the part that requires me to just be straight with you, because it gets worse the more specific it gets. When Carl got Elena's body home, it had been decomposing for 18 months in a Florida vault. It was not intact. Florida heat is brutal even in a sealed mausoleum. The state of the body was very bad, and Carl Tanzler spent months, possibly years, trying to put her back together. He used wire to hold the bones together. He used plaster of Paris and silk to rebuild the tissue, the form of her body. He used glass eyes, the kind used for dolls or taxidermy, and set them in her face. He soaked the remaining skin in preserving chemicals. He rebuilt her features using a combination of wax and plaster. He put a wig on her, made from her own hair, which her family had given him as a keepsake when she died. He dressed her in a white wedding gown. He put perfume on her. He put her in a bed. He talked to her. He played the organ for her. He had one in the house, and he said she responded to the music, that she could hear him. He told anyone he trusted that Elena was home, that they were together now, that he was finally taking care of her the way he was always meant to. He lived like this for 7 years. 7 years. Here's something strange about this story. It wasn't a total secret. Carl Tanzler didn't exactly hide what he was doing. He didn't openly announce it, but he talked. He told people. Over the years, people in Key West heard things. Rumors circulated. A few people knew or suspected or had heard enough to be able to guess. And here's what they did. Not much. Key West in the 1930s was a very specific kind of place. Isolated at the very bottom of Florida, connected to the mainland by a highway that had only recently been finished. It had its own culture, its own rhythms, its own way of handling things. Carl Tanzler had been there for years. He was known. People weren't sure the rumors were true, and those who thought they might be true apparently weren't sure what to do about it. Some people thought it was sad but harmless, a grieving man going too far. The body was in his house. Nobody checked, and Carl just kept living his life, quietly, strangely, but without any major disruption. Until October 1940, when Elena's sister Florinda finally decided to find out if the rumors were true. She went to the house. She knocked on the door. Carl let her in, and she saw her sister in the chair. She went straight to the police. Carl Tanzler was arrested that same night. The police examined the body and brought in medical examiners. What they found was, it was definitely Elena. The reconstruction was remarkable, actually. Carl had genuine technical skill from years of medical and laboratory work. The bones were correctly articulated, wired together. The waxwork on the face was detailed. From a distance, in dim light, in the chair with the wig and the dress, it looked almost like a sleeping woman. But the examination also found something else. Inside the body, there was a tube, inserted in the pelvic region. The medical examiner's conclusion, and the word used in later accounts, was that Tanzler had been using the body for sexual purposes. He had been sleeping next to her for 7 years. And it was not just sleeping. Carl Tanzler was charged with wantonly and maliciously destroying a grave, essentially desecrating a burial site and stealing a corpse. He was held, and the case went to a preliminary hearing. And then the lawyers figured something out. The statute of limitations in Florida at the time was 2 years for that offense. Elena had been taken from the tomb in 1933. The charges were being filed in 1940. 7 years later. The charges were dropped. Carl Tanzler walked out of the courthouse a free man. And here's the part of this story that I think says the most. When news of what Tanzler had done got out, it spread fast. This was 1940. There were no social media posts or viral videos, but newspapers picked it up and it became a national story almost immediately. People across America were reading about the German doctor in Key West who lived with a dead woman, and a significant number of them, a genuinely significant number, responded with sympathy, not for Elena, for Carl. People called it romantic. Letters came into newspapers calling him a devoted lover who couldn't let go. Radio programs talked about it as a strange but touching love story. The word devotion came up constantly. In Key West itself, the reaction was mixed but leaned soft. People had known Carl. He was eccentric but not threatening. He'd been kind to Elena's family when she was dying. He'd paid for her funeral. And now here he was, This older man who'd clearly lost his mind from grief, but seemed so genuinely broken by her loss that people struggled to be fully angry. Elena's body, after being examined and photographed, was put on public display at a local funeral home. They put her on display. Thousands of people came to see her. Lines stretched down the street. People drove in from surrounding towns. It was treated almost like an exhibit. The family had to demand she be taken down and buried properly, in a secret location this time, so Tanzler couldn't find her again. They had to hide where they buried her from him. The photographs from the funeral home display were published in newspapers. Carl Tanzler sold the story of his romance with Elena. He wrote a memoir. He gave interviews. He posed for photographs. He was never prosecuted for anything. He never spent a single day in prison. He moved north to Zephyr Hills, Florida, and he disappeared back into quiet life. Carl Tanzler lived for another 12 years after the arrest. He kept to himself in Zephyr Hills. He had a small house. He worked on things, medical instruments, technical projects. He was still occasionally recognized as the man from the story. He would sometimes give interviews where he talked about Elena with the same calm certainty he always had, that she had loved him, that they had been meant for each other, that what he did came from a place of pure devotion. He made a life-size plaster effigy of her, a death mask, essentially, but full body. He kept it in the house. On July 23rd, 1952, a neighbor found him on the floor of his home. He had been dead for several days. His body was near the effigy of Elena. He was 74 years old. That's how it ended. Not in prison, not with any real consequence. Just an old man dying alone in a room with a statue of a woman who never loved him. His published memoir was still in print when he died. I want to talk about something before we close out, because there's a version of this story that keeps getting told wrong. The version you'll find in a lot of places frames Carl Tanzler as this tragic romantic, a man so in love he couldn't let her go, star-crossed, devoted. And I understand why that framing happens. It makes the story easier to sit with. It gives you something to feel other than just dread. But let's be honest about what actually happened. Elena de Hoyos was a 22-year-old woman who was sick and dying, and being overwhelmed by the attention of a much older man who was giving her things and telling her he could save her. She was kind to him. She didn't throw him out. But there's no evidence she was in love with him. No letters, no declarations. Nothing from her side that suggested she saw him as anything other than a doctor who'd become uncomfortably attached. She died, and he made her into something he could control. Because here's the thing about the body in the chair. Carl couldn't have a real relationship with Elena when she was alive. She had her own thoughts, her own feelings, her own choices. She could say no. She could be kind to him and still not love him back. And there was nothing he could do about that. But the body in the chair couldn't say no. He could dress her how he wanted, sit her where he wanted, talk to her and assign her whatever responses he wanted. He had complete control over who she was now. That's not love. That's the opposite of love. Love requires the other person to actually be there, to actually choose you, to push back sometimes, to be a real person with their own wants. Carl Tanzler didn't want that. He wanted an image he'd been chasing since childhood, the face from the visions. And when he found a real woman who matched that image, and she couldn't fulfill the fantasy the way a real person never can, he just waited until she died and rebuilt her the way he actually wanted her. The town called it devotion. The newspapers called it romance. Elena was 22 years old when she died. She should have gotten to be something. Instead, she became someone else's prop for 9 years after her death. She has a memorial in Key West now. People leave flowers. But for a long time, she was mostly a footnote in Carl Tanzler's story. She was the story. He was the cautionary tale. The house Carl Tanzler lived in during those 7 years, the one where he kept her, it doesn't exist anymore. It was torn down eventually. The mausoleum in the Key West cemetery is still there though. Elena's family had it sealed after she was moved to the secret burial site. But the structure remains. People visit it sometimes, leave things. Carl Tanzler's memoir is genuinely still findable if you go looking. He wrote about Elena's voice through the tomb walls, about rebuilding her, about their life together. He describes all of it as beautiful. He never once seemed to understand what he'd done. And that might be the most unsettling thing about any of this. Not the 7 years, not the body in the chair, not even the fact that he walked free. It's that Carl Tanzler died completely at peace with himself. He had the love story he wanted, even if it only existed in his head, even if she never agreed to it. He built it anyway. If you made it this far, thank you. This story stays with me. I keep coming back to it, and I wanted to make sure when I told it right. Elena Milagro de Hoyos, 22 years old, Key West, Florida. She deserved better than all of this. I'll see you in the next one.